Prologue. Inside a Lemurian prison was one of the most dangerous Lemurians the world had known. His name was Dromedon. Special care was taken with Dromedon. His arms and legs were spread apart, furthermore, they were inside metal casings, which were attached to the cell walls. Moreover, a computerized golden helmet was on his head and it supposedly prevented him from using his vast mental abilities. However, the helmet didn't prevent someone with similar powers from penetrating it. Therefore, Crow's betrayer telepathically spoke freely and undetected with Dromedon. "I have great news," said the betrayer. "What is it?" asked Dromedon. "The leaders of Wakanda are coming tomorrow for a state visit. We can use them to our advantage." "I'm listening," said Dromedon. Dromedon couldn't believe the plan that was laid out for him. "You would see Lemuria and Wakanda burn for our aims?" inquired Dromedon. "Yes." "Excellent." 24 hours later, all of Lemuria's attention was on the royal helipad where King Crow awaited the arrival of T'Challa and Ororo for a state visit. The eagerly anticipated visit was for an alliance between Lemuria and Wakanda. The regal Crow and his wife stood patiently in front of the honorary guards. Suddenly, a small Wakandan plane came overhead and then it descended. T'Challa and Ororo alighted from the plane and waved at the gathered crowd. Crow and his wife greeted the leaders of Wakanda. Abruptly, T'Challa drew his sword and without warning he stabbed Crow's wife through the heart. The queen fell dead and pandemonium ensued on the helipad. Crow attacked T'Challa while the honorary guards rushed forward. T'Challa broke free from Crow and a sudden gust lifted T'Challa and Ororo from the helipad and the couple accelerated into the sky. T'Challa and Ororo climbed to several thousand feet and then they disappeared. Chapter 1. I was taken over, said T'Challa in his defense. "I had awareness but my body was controlled by someone else." "Who?" inquired Ororo breathlessly. The couple walked briskly to the Psi Studies medical lab room. T'Challa had the sword teleport the couple to the lab once they were outside of the Lemurian anti-teleportation zone. "I don't know," replied T'Challa. "But we'll run a scan to see if anything is still present." "I'll contact Crow and try to explain," said Ororo. T'Challa briefed the lab technicians while he lay in the scanner machine. "Detail scan," said T'Challa. Straps came across T'Challa's body and then a cover slid over him. "I can't believe I killed her," thought T'Challa. Meanwhile, Ororo called the intelligence division. "I want a list of Crow's enemies and ours. Cross-reference the list. I want to see the persons with the highest probability of being behind this," said Ororo. "And I want it by the time I arrive." Ororo exited the laboratory, and she flew towards the intelligence division. "I can only imagine what Crow must be thinking," thought Ororo. Ororo arrived at her destination in 3 minutes. She was promptly furnished with the requested information. Dromedon was the major suspect. Moreover, Dromedon was a prisoner in Lemuria and he possessed psi abilities. "All right, call Lemuria, tell them I want to speak with Crow," said Ororo. The connection took 5 minutes before Crow appeared on the video link. Crow showed no sign of his deviant heritage. He looked human, he had a burly body, short black beard and he was bald. Although Crow resembled a man in his mid-30s, he was, in fact, over 20,000 years old. "Crow, please listen. I know you are hurt but you have to believe that T'Challa and I would not be knowingly a part of it," said Ororo. "Really?" said Crow composed. "T'Challa said that he was taken over by a third party. I have a suspect." "Dromedon," said Ororo. "Dromedon," said Crow with a steely voice. "Is that the best you can come up with? He is locked behind the utmost impenetrable security. You know T'Challa's character. What I know is that you haven't yet shown remorse for my wife's death. But you shall pay dearly. Where's T'Challa? He's taking a psi scan. Crow, I ask you to reconsider and not act rashly. Check Dromedan for yourself, and I'm sorry. Ororo and Crow stared at each other intensely. Ororo hoped that a shroud of doubt existed in Crow's heart, since he knew T'Challa was an honorable man. I will call back, and T'Challa better be there, said Crow. Chapter 2. Crow dried his eyes and returned to his hardened persona. He exited the communications room. He bypassed the generals and the concerned courtesans. Then Crow went to the maximum security prison. Dromedan was the sole prisoner. A computerized helmet covered Dromedan's head. The helmet acted as containment of Dromedan's immense psi powers that included the disintegration of a target by thought. Additionally, the computer collected information which was then passed on to Crow's special project. Crow viewed Dromedan through the transparent cell door. Crow noted the metal bonds that held Dromedan's arms and legs. Has anything odd occurred within the last hour? Quizzed Crow. No, Your Majesty, responded the warden. Crow watched the helpless Dromedan. Dromedan was 8 feet tall, grotesque features, muscular, and he had a brown pigmentation. Crow's curiosity was satisfied and his hatred for T'Challa returned. He had no more doubts. Crow returned to the communications room and he contacted Wakanda. T'Challa and Ororo appeared on the screen. Dromedan is a harm to no one, said Crow, and he focused on T'Challa. If you don't present yourself immediately in Lemuria for judgment, then I'm coming for you, said Crow. Then I'll be there, said T'Challa. Chapter 3. T'Challa faced execution in Lemuria and Wakanda was informed about the situation. The alternative is war, said T'Challa while he lay on his bed. Probably that's the motive of whoever is behind this, said Ororo as she went over T'Challa. Hopefully I can plead my case, said T'Challa as he passed his hands through Ororo's wild hair. Hopefully, said Ororo, then she kissed T'Challa. T'Challa held his wife's warm body and he wished that it was not for the last time. Chapter 4. T'Challa piloted the jet into Lemuria and the winged soldiers shepherded the plane to the military airfield. T'Challa was taken into custody, and he was brought before Crow. I'm sorry, said T'Challa. I see that you didn't bring the murder weapon, said Crow. I'm also sorry because we lost an opportunity. I saw the symbolism of the alliance. You're a human, Ororo is a mutant, and I'm a deviant. The Celestials made me from humans in the quest to find mutants. And our two countries are the most advanced on Earth. We could have helped this planet. Crow, listen to me. Someone wants us at each other's throats. I did not intentionally kill your wife, said T'Challa. Crow sighed as he peered at the bounded T'Challa who was on his knees. Nothing proves that. I will give my verdict in an hour, said Crow. T'Challa was taken away and he was placed inside the same prison as Dromedan. Chapter 5. The cell was small. A neck restraint held T'Challa off the ground, his legs were inside metal bounds and his arms were stretched to the sides by manacles. Instinct made T'Challa aware that an explosion was imminent. A bright flash occurred outside the cell and the guards disappeared. Ororo, thought T'Challa. But it was not Ororo. 6 Lemurian commandos broke through the cell door. The leader sprayed a substance in T'Challa's face and he slipped into unconsciousness. When T'Challa awakened, he heard the sea. He was still bounded but in a metal straitjacket. A tight mask was on his face. He sensed the 6 nearby commandos. Chapter 6. A furious Crow contacted Ororo. He escaped, said Crow. I was not aware of it, said Ororo, and she was partially thankful. Where is he? I don't know. Only you could have freed him. I know he is in Wakanda. He's not here. "I'll be coming to find out for myself," said Crow, and he terminated the link. Ororo took a moment, and then she called General Yan. "Prepare the army. The Lemurians have declared war on us," said Ororo. "I'll get the defenses ready," said Yan. "The priority is not defense. We're going to attack Lemuria," said Ororo. Ororo had another option for the war: Wakanda's Omega weapon. T'Challa had speculated that Lemuria also had an Omega weapon. Would Crow eventually use his? Ororo pondered. Afterwards Ororo contacted the operators of the hider machine. "Place it on standby," said Ororo. Then Ororo shifted her attention on finding T'Challa. Chapter 7 Crow's skin grew in organic battle armor. He clenched his fist and he felt the swell of the super strength in his body. Crow was confident his accelerated healing would withstand any of Ororo's attacks. Crow determined his super speed and flight would be advantageous over Ororo. Then Crow thought about the Volusia, his Omega weapon. He had modeled the weapon on Dromedan's disintegration ability. Furthermore, he had hidden it in a pocket dimension that was accessible only by him. "If I can't find T'Challa, then I'll use it," thought Crow. Thereafter, Crow ordered the mobilization of his army. Chapter 8 Meanwhile, General Ghoul of Lemuria contacted Dromedan telepathically. "The plan is back on track," said Ghoul. "The Volusia is almost within our grasps." "Where do you have T'Challa?" "At the ruins." "Why is he still alive?" "I can use him in case any other problems occur," said Ghoul. "Someone is coming." Ghoul slipped the serpent crown from his head and he hid it under his coat. A subordinate knocked on the office door. "Come in," said Ghoul. "General, the king wants everyone assembled," said the subordinate. "Thank you." The subordinate left the office. Ghoul took out the serpent crown that he had found in the ruins. The crown's psi powers were useless against Crow's psi shields, yet they were able to bypass the prison's security. As a result, Ghoul had temporarily released Dromedan. Andromedan had used his telekinesis on T'Challa to assassinate Crow's wife. Next story, The Lemuria-Wakanda War Part 2 Chapter 1 Despite T'Challa's present position, he still sympathized with Crow's behavior. "I will even knock over Thor if he should stand between me and Ororo's killer," he thought. All the while, T'Challa activated the tracker signal hidden in the crown of his right molar. Then his fingers made subtle movements underneath the metallic straitjacket. He was aware of the locations of the 6 Lemurian commandos, even though a mask blocked his sight. Furthermore, the mask had an air filter attached to it. He did not know the reason for the filter. T'Challa's thumbnails activated the tiny lasers inserted in the first fingers. He rolled from his back onto his stomach. Then he heard the footsteps of a commando and in the background the rough sea. The lasers burnt through the straitjacket and gave T'Challa's steely fingers room to work. T'Challa's fingers and muscular arms moved in tandem. He heard the commando above him. But it was too late. T'Challa was free and he switched off the lasers. He held the commando's legs and then tripped the assailant over. Then T'Challa quickly pinched eye holes into the mask. He smelt and heard the 5 other commandos who had taken him from the Lemurian prison. T'Challa reacted swiftly. He landed his right elbow into the felled commando's throat. Subsequently, T'Challa used the commando as a shield from the laser fire that came from the others. He seized the commando's combat knife, then he sliced the bounds on his legs. A laser beam struck his left leg, but it did not burn. Instead, T'Challa's leg slowly became numb. Stun mode, T'Challa realized. Nonetheless, he threw the commando onto another one. With a savage war cry, T'Challa spun into a yellow-haired commando. He inserted the knife into the hand that the commando held the rifle with. Then T'Challa's left thumb struck a vital point on the Lemurian, paralyzing him. The next events occurred in a flash to T'Challa. He used the paralyzed commando as a shield to close on the 4 other commandos. T'Challa seized the nearest one, damaged a pressure point and then took control of his rifle. He fired into the last 3 and they fell unconscious. For a moment, T'Challa remained alert and his sleek muscled body was in a battle stance. His senses and warrior instinct indicated that the scene had no more hostiles. T'Challa's left leg became limp. He ripped the top of the mask off to see his surroundings clearly. At once he knew his location: the ruins. It explained the air filters because toxins pervaded area. He hobbled to a fallen pillar and he leaned against it. Then T'Challa observed the hieroglyphics on the pillar. The markings were meaningless, but they represented a time when Lemuria was at the height of world power. As a result, T'Challa remembered the story of Lemuria's downfall. The Celestials destroyed a major city called Volusia and seismic explosions took most of Lemuria into the sea. The event was termed the Great Cataclysm. So who wants Wakanda and Lemuria at war? T'Challa pondered. A gold light appeared in front of T'Challa. A goddess-like woman shimmered in the light. The light subsided and Ororo stood in the aftermath. She wore an air mask and held T'Challa's sword in her right hand. Her eyes turned from a gleam to a blue hue. Then she approached T'Challa. "Missed me?" asked Ororo, while she held T'Challa's head comfortingly. "You bet I did," replied T'Challa, and he held Ororo's left hip. Ororo glimpsed the commandos. "Did you find out who is behind this?" inquired Ororo. "Nothing," answered T'Challa. "Well, we can't stay. Crow thinks you're in Wakanda and I don't want to give him the chance to reach us. So I brought the army." "Agreed," said T'Challa. "Also at some point he will use his Omega weapon. We have to get to him before that happens," said Ororo. Then the sword teleported the couple and the commandos to the New York Maya warship. Afterwards Ororo's storm descended on Lemuria. The sky darkened. An electromagnetic pulse drained unprotected electrical devices, howling winds snatched away loose objects, heavy rains caused flash floods, random ground lightning made travel treacherous, and visibility fell to 0. Chapter 2 The New York Maya's war room was brightened by the hologram of Lemuria. T'Challa, Ororo, Umba, General Yan, and Shuri stood around the hologram. "The Lemurians have dug in themselves because of the storm. Force fields protect urban areas and military bases," said Yan. "We need submarines in the Gulf to prevent Crow from sneaking out," said T'Challa. "May I suggest something?" asked Shuri. Everyone turned to her. Shuri was an attractive young woman with chestnut brown eyes. "That we take out their communication network," said Shuri. "Without it their forces will be in disarray. My commandos and I can infiltrate those bases and urban areas using the storm as cover. Then covertly impair the network." T'Challa and Ororo made eye contact and with their telepathic understanding agreed with Shuri. "We'll do it," said T'Challa. "I'll prepare the logistics after this meeting," said Shuri. T'Challa returned his focus on the hologram. He singled out Crow's command center. Intelligence gathered on the base stated it was techno-organic. 10% was above ground and the rest went 3 miles underground. Also the base was invulnerable to a nuclear attack and below 0 temperatures. "But what about Umba's attack?" T'Challa pondered. "The extent of his powers aren't fully known," thought T'Challa. "We can capture Crow," said T'Challa. "Then show him the commandos, that way he'll know we didn't lie to him." "How will you get in?" asked Yan. T'Challa turned his head to Umba, but the teenager appeared distant. T'Challa was unsure as to the reason. "Up for it," asked T'Challa. Yes, said Umba purposefully. However, Umba's mind was on Enzi and their secret. Umba had sworn on his love for Enzi that he would not divulge that she and her parents were members of Wakanda's secret society. Enzi had confessed it when she followed her parents' wishes to end the relationship. She did not, hence Umba had promised to marry her. Therefore Umba was torn between his guardians T'Challa and Ororo and Enzi. We should have both plans ready in the next 30 minutes, said Ororo. The group agreed and they exited the war room. However, Shuri called T'Challa over to her. Subsequently Shuri hugged her brother. Mother sent that. She really thought that you had given yourself up for execution, said Shuri. But I knew you had a plan to get out. I'll speak with her, said T'Challa. Shuri separated from T'Challa and in moments the angular woman disappeared around a bend. T'Challa reflected on his younger sister. When their father was killed it also affected her. Since T'Chaka had also instilled the good values and virtues in Shuri as he did with T'Challa. What was that about? Asked Ororo as she eased up to T'Challa. Mother was worried, replied T'Challa. Ororo remembered that the last meeting with Ramonda was not pleasant. Ramonda was against Umba receiving the Black Panther combat training from T'Challa. She believed the training was reserved for those of the direct Bashanga bloodline. Hopefully she may change her mind, thought Ororo. T'Challa held Ororo's hand and they entered the elevator. Umba followed. Chapter 3. An hour later, Shuri's mission commenced. Ororo deployed via tornadoes 200 commando units in Lemuria where visibility outside the force fields was zero. The commandos were disguised as Lemurians and they feigned injuries to be allowed into the bases and urban areas. Whereupon the commandos used hidden equipment to disrupt the communications that went in and out. Shuri and her unit's particular target was the prison Dromedan was kept in. The Lemurian Military Command Center. Inside the command center, Crows said nothing when he received the news of the network loss. He shook his head to say that he heard. Then he stared at the hologram of Wakanda. He believed the storm was a delay tactic by Ororo. But Crow's patience had thinned. Winds and rain can't protect T'Challa from me, thought Crow. Prepare the submarines, he ordered. The submarines were on the last level of the command center. The vessels had flight capabilities, therefore they would fly through a tunnel towards the sea. Meanwhile, General Ghoul observed Crow with contempt. Ghoul believed that Crow had allowed Lemuria to rot while other empires took control of the world. Occasionally, Ghoul touched the serpent crown that was tucked underneath his coat. The crown was silver with two snakes' heads at the front. The coils of the snakes shaped the rest of the crown. Why don't you use the Volusia? Ghoul pondered. He stared at Crow intently. Crow saw him. Ghoul, said Crow. Yes, Majesty, said Ghoul as he ascended the steps. Crow was on the second level of the control room and he moved from behind the Wakanda hologram. We have to make a new plan of attack, said Crow. From the sea. Any suggestions? We can use the Leviathans to clear a path through Wakanda's navy, then push through with our ships, and then deploy the mutates we have at disposal. We should inflict 50% damage to their forces, replied Ghoul. Good plan, said Crow. One question if your Majesty permits, said Ghoul. What is it? What if the Wakandans use their Omega weapon, then we will lose the war. So shouldn't we strike them with ours first? Asked Ghoul. Your concern is noted, said Crow. Then Crow held the shoulder of the second in command of the army and he whispered. I have the Volusia on standby. Ghoul kept his composure when he heard the information. Tell me its location so I can take it from you, thought Ghoul. Where? Whispered Ghoul. Suddenly the security alarms blared. Crow turned to the control room personnel. "Multiple breaches," shouted a technician. "Where?" queried Crow. "Directly above us," someone responded. Abruptly the organic ceiling on the left of the control room turned black and disintegrated. Then T'Challa, Ororo, and Umba descended through the breach. Chapter 4 Ororo created an air pressure dome which knocked down the personnel. T'Challa's jetpack propelled him towards Crow. Ghoul leapt in front of Crow to shield him. However, T'Challa punched Ghoul out of his way. Then T'Challa stabbed his sword into Crow as the king's organic armor formed. "The same instrument that took my wife also takes my life," said Crow in pain. "Look again," said T'Challa. "I avoided the vital organs." "I want you alive," said T'Challa. Crow's organic armor disappeared and his accelerated healing was nullified by the sword's blade. "They're coming," shouted Ororo. T'Challa secured Crow in an arm grip. Unbeknownst to T'Challa was that Ghoul had slipped out the control room. Thereafter he contacted Dromedon with the serpent crown. "Trust me, Crow," said T'Challa, "I'm doing this to save both our countries pain." "Damn you, T'Challa," said Crow. Suddenly T'Challa felt his body taken over by a third party. "It's happening again," thought T'Challa. T'Challa's grip of Crow slackened, and he withdrew the sword. Crow felt the shift in momentum and he summoned his strength. He broke out of T'Challa's hold, however the wound impaired his ability to fight. Therefore, Crow levitated slightly off the floor and he moved away from T'Challa. T'Challa's body was frozen. Subsequently, Ghoul returned to the control room and he took Crow into safety. Ororo tried to use her powers on Ghoul, but Dromedon stopped her heart. As a result, Ororo collapsed. Dromedon then ceased the movement of the muscles in Ororo's lungs. Meanwhile, Umba's computerized visor told him the situation and he heard the horde of mutates and soldiers that descended on the control room. At once, Umba faced indecision. Ororo had told him not to use his powers to kill others. "But I have to use it to save her and T'Challa," thought Umba. Thus Umba was about to command the visor to remove the eye shields when another event occurred. The horde froze in their movements and Dromedon had done it. Chapter 5 Ghoul scrambled Crow down to the submarines. "Your Majesty, we can't delay any longer," said Ghoul. "We have to use the Volusia." "Can I trust him with such power?" Crow contemplated. Eventually, Ghoul and Crow arrived at the submarine level. But Ghoul stayed out the sight of the personnel that were there. "Your Majesty." "Where is it?" asked Ghoul. Crow relented and he whispered the location. Ghoul dropped Crow uncaringly onto the floor. Then Ghoul stared coldly at Crow while he placed the serpent crown on his head. Crow recognized the crown that was created by worshippers of a mystical Lemurian reptilian creature. The crown was believed to be lost. Ghoul's eyes produced a yellow gleam. Then two king cobras floated out of the crown. The snakes coiled around an astonished Crow. Then the snakes bit Crow's neck. Subsequently, the reptile's mystical venom infected the king's soul. Then the snakes retreated into the crown. Crow's body slowly became paralyzed. Then Ghoul went by Crow's right ear. T'Challa was telling the truth. "It was Dromedon and I who really killed your wife," said Ghoul. "And we will restore Lemuria to the glory she once had as rulers of this world." Afterwards, Ghoul abandoned Crow and the king slowly slipped into a coma. Ghoul contacted Dromedon. "Brother, I have the location." "It is at Aden," said Ghoul. "So we don't need the Wakandans again." "Kill them and I will meet you at the place," said Ghoul. Then Ghoul ended the link. Thereafter, Ghoul telepathically took control of the submarine personnel minds like he did with the prison warden and guards. "Sleep," said Ghoul and the personnel collapsed. Then he chose a mini-submersible. He entered the vessel and then he piloted it down the tunnel towards the sea. All the while, he eagerly awaited the destruction of the targets he had for the Volusian, namely the United States of America, the other NATO countries, Russia, China, and Wakanda. Chapter 6. A psi blast from Dromedan knocked out everyone at the prison except for Shuri because she had recently received psi shields. Shuri knew the psi blast was Dromedan's doing. She ripped off the Lemurian disguise. Beneath the disguise was the white vibranium Panther suit that the commandos used. She armed herself with a sonic wave cannon and then she activated the suit's invisibility camouflage. Then Shuri journeyed to Dromedan's cell. She found all the doors to the cell opened. Eventually, Shuri came upon the giant Dromedan as he was about to kill T'Challa and Ororo with his telekinesis. Dromedan did not detect Shuri because he was preoccupied with his concentration. Thus Shuri fired the sonic wave cannon at Dromedan. The high-pitched sound destroyed Dromedan's inner ears and he was knocked unconscious by the force of the sound wave. Immediately, Shuri drew her laser blades and she settled over Dromedan's head. "They should have done this to you in the first place," thought Shuri as she lobotomized Dromedan. Chapter 7. Inside the command center, T'Challa and Ororo regained control of their bodies. The mutate horde were also freed from Dromedan's influence, hence they resumed their attack. Umba somersaulted out of an energy-projected attack and he landed next to Ororo. "Down!" shouted Ororo. Umba dropped onto the floor while Ororo summoned an electrical burst from her hands. The majority of the horde was hurt by the attack. Then to Ororo's surprise, several of the mutates phased through the attack. "Intangibles," said Ororo. Ororo lifted Umba and herself on air currents. She carried them to T'Challa's position. "I still have Crow's scent, he didn't go far," said T'Challa. "Then we finish the mission," said Ororo. T'Challa activated his jetpack and Umba followed. T'Challa exited the control room through the passage Ghoul had used. The passage was devoid of enemy combatants, thus T'Challa and Umba flew freely. Ororo remained behind the two and she covered the escape as she flew backwards. Ororo fired plasma energy from her right hand and lightning from her left hand. Soon after, T'Challa came upon Crow and took him up. He noticed the snake bites. "Aiden," muttered Crow, "Aiden." Afterwards Crow went into a coma. The only Aiden T'Challa knew of was the Gulf of Aden that was a few miles from Lemuria. But T'Challa did not linger too much on the thought. His new concern was escape. "Ororo and Umba, I'm going to do it now," shouted T'Challa. Ororo and Umba came close to T'Challa. Then T'Challa said to the sword, "Time shift." Chapter 8. T'Challa along with Crow, Ororo, and Umba traveled like quicksilver through the hordes of soldiers and mutates. The ability placed an inhuman strain on their bodies that they could not sustain. Nonetheless, the wills of the three kept them conscious. Soon the group passed through the tunnel that was created by Umba's powers. T'Challa and his family emerged from the command center and they headed for the force field. "Normal time," said T'Challa to the sword. The sword's time computers obliged. The atoms of the humans and Crow stopped operating 3 seconds faster than normal time. A sharp jerk occurred during the transition. T'Challa flew ahead at the blue and wavy force field, and he made 2 crossed slashes with the sword on the force field. As a result, the force field was momentarily torn. T'Challa moved out the way so Ororo and Umba could pass through the opening. Then T'Challa slipped out the force field. Subsequently, the force field healed itself. Afterwards the group teleported to the New York Maya warship. Chapter 9. Umba collapsed after the teleportation and he was rushed to the medical section. Shortly afterwards, he regained consciousness. Ororo was near the bed and she ran her fingers through his hair. "You performed well on the mission. You did not panic, but I did. When that thing happened to you and those creatures were coming, I almost used my powers to kill them. To save you, said Umba. Was it your gut instinct? Asked Ororo. Yeah, replied Umba. Then it was the correct decision. Luckily you didn't have to, said Ororo. Ororo, said Umba, as he was going to tell her the truth about Enzi. Then Umba remembered his oath to Enzi and the moment did not feel right to tell Ororo. What is it? Asked Ororo. Thanks for taking care of me. You're important and special to T'Challa and me, said Ororo. Then she kissed Umba on the forehead. I'm going to check Crow's condition now, said Ororo. I'll be back. Ororo left Umba's section and she passed the transparent room that held sedated Lemurian commandos, and then she came upon Crow's room. T'Challa was outside and he spoke with a doctor. Then T'Challa turned to Ororo. The doctors don't know what is the cause of Crow's state. The wound I inflicted couldn't have sent him into a coma, said T'Challa. We can check him with the alternative medicine, said Ororo. By the way, Shuri reported that she eliminated Dromedon. She survived some kind of psi attack that took out everyone else and Dromedon was moving around freely. Is she all right? Seems like it. Ororo placed her left finger under her lower lip as she thought. So was Dromedon acting alone, or are there more people involved in the conspiracy? Asked Ororo. I think there are others. In particular someone who left snake bites in Crow, said T'Challa. The couple entered Crow's room. The king looked peaceful even though the last 2 days were torrid for him. The really sad thing about this was the loss of his wife, presuming she was innocent of anything, said Ororo. If we get through this I don't think the alliance will work, said T'Challa. Why? Crow and Lemuria will always view me as the Queen's killer. We'll see in time, said Ororo, and she held T'Challa's hand. But how are you handling your part in this? Inquired Ororo. It's something I have to live with. General Esyan called the couple urgently to the war room. The general did not waste time informing T'Challa and Ororo of the new development. The submarines are tracking a small sub from Lemuria that is heading for the Gulf of Aden, said Esyan. And this is what the stealth piercer satellites found at Aden. Esyan brought up a hologram of an island, and not far inland was a structure. The actual height of the structure was 40 feet high. Aden, thought T'Challa as he remembered Crow's words. What is the ETA of the vessel? Asked Ororo. 1 minute, replied Esyan. Give us the coordinates of the structure, said T'Challa. Another thing, said Esyan. It's one of those Lemurian living islands. Got it, said Ororo. In the next 30 seconds, T'Challa and Ororo appeared in front of the Volusia. The structure was techno-organic, dark grey, and slender. At the base was a seat apparatus. I think we found Crow's Omega weapon, said T'Challa. He picked up a pebble and he threw it at the Volusia. The Volusia disintegrated the pebble in an instant. Suddenly the ground moved like an animal had awakened, and then it stopped. Both leaders' chemoyos vibrated and they answered them. The chemoyos indicated that the vessel had emerged from the sea and it moved inland. The pilot probably has a means of pacifying the island, said T'Challa. Ororo sensed the ship in the air currents and T'Challa heard the engines. Eventually the vessel arrived and landed. Ghoul expressed shock on his face when he saw that the Black Panther and Storm stood in front of the Volusia. T'Challa and Ororo saw him. Don't you just enjoy these little moments? Asked T'Challa. Sure do, replied Ororo. Then Ororo extended her right hand and she manipulated the air currents around the ship. Consequently, the air currents flipped the ship. Afterwards, Ororo fired lightning at the vessel. Inside the ship, Ghoul tried to contact Dromedan without success. In desperation, Ghoul released the king cobras from the crown. Ororo attacked the snakes with lightning. But the attacks were passing through the hissing snakes. "Allow me," said T'Challa. Then he charged into the now giant snakes with his sword. T'Challa made 2 lumberjack swipes at the snakes' torsos. The snakes were parted in 2 and they disappeared. Ororo snapped her right fingers and the air currents turned over the ship. "Are you done?" shouted Ororo. "You can come out or we can come in and get you. What's your decision?" No response came. T'Challa leapt on the ship and he slashed through the top of the pilot seat until he saw the bruised Ghoul. Ghoul used the crown's telepathy on T'Challa, but the psi shields impeded it. T'Challa grabbed the crown off of Ghoul's head and he threw it behind him. Ororo caught it. Then T'Challa pulled Ghoul out with one hand and brought the sword to Ghoul's throat. Ororo floated next to T'Challa. "He was the one who protected Crow," said Ororo. T'Challa noticed the Lemurian military rank on Ghoul's uniform. "Then left him in a coma," said T'Challa. "We'll get the full story from Crow when he wakes," said Ororo. Ghoul smirked slightly since he knew that the snake's venom was permanent. T'Challa saw Ghoul's reaction. "Oh, you didn't know? We have means of waking him," said T'Challa menacingly. For a moment, Ghoul's eyes showed a hint of terror. Chapter 10 Near Warrior's Fall in Wakanda was a bungalow. The owner was an ancient practitioner of mystical matters. The short and thin man used his knowledge to revive Crow. After 5 hours, Crow's eyes twitched and he awakened. The first thing he remembered was Ghoul's words to him. Then Ghoul saw the old man, T'Challa, and Ororo. It was Ghoul and Dromedan. "They killed her," said Crow. "I'm sorry for the way I treated you both. It was perfectly natural." "But can you do something for us?" asked T'Challa. "What?" "Tell your countrymen that everything has been settled between our 2 countries," said T'Challa dryly. Crow knew something was wrong from T'Challa's tone of voice. "I will, but what happened?" inquired Crow while he rose from the mat. "Some of them attacked my family in the States and the Queen Mother who was overseas," replied Ororo. "The bodyguards protected my family and they are all right, but Mother is missing," said T'Challa. "Do my people have them?" asked Crow. "The attackers didn't survive and from what we know she is not in Lemurian hands," answered T'Challa. Crow's face expressed his sympathy, yet T'Challa's remained hardened. The next 2 hours passed quickly. Ororo lifted the storm from Lemuria. Meanwhile, Crow along with a bounded Ghoul returned to the country. Subsequently, Crow ended hostilities against Wakanda. Afterwards, T'Challa, Ororo, Umba, and Shuri headed for Berlin where Ramonda was last seen.